Thank you, Hannah and Joe. I hadn't really kind of known either of your stories that well, and I was kind of moved by listening to both of you and resonate with both of you in many ways as well. Um, the thing that just occurs to me just listening to you guys is that thought is heavy, and I didn't know this. And it's probably worth giving you a bit of background to my kind of health story. So, before I got sick all those years ago, I was very much a kind of type A striver, achiever kind of guy. And, if you were to characterize what it probably looked like in my head, if you tried to picture it, you can imagine this big control panel with lots of levers and things like that. And it really felt like it was my job to manipulate those levers and to try and get my life right. So it's like the relationship lever, the finance lever, the what am I doing with my life lever, the relationship lever. Like there was levers for everything, and I was busy in my mind doing what I thought everybody did, which was going around trying to configure those things exactly right so that I could have the perfect life. And as you can imagine, that was pretty hard going. And I just thought that was the way it worked. And I had evidence in my life that seemed to support that being how life worked as well. So I apparently had done quite well. I was good at my job as an IT consultant. I'd done well academically. I used to train like a crazy man in the gym. And it all looked like it was a product of my very good configuring of the levers in my mind. And somehow I was able to conveniently forget those occasions when things didn't quite work out the way I thought they were going to, because I was always focused on, yeah, I'm good at this lever configuring thing. So that's how it looked to me. And then in 2007, I got sick, and there was quite a lot of stuff going on in my life. We were looking after someone who had cancer. I just got married. We were pregnant with our first child. And then I got hit by this virus, and it really, really floored me. And I had all kinds of treatments. I had, medication. I had all sorts of stuff happened, and I seemed to just keep going downhill. And it actually culminated in me at one point collapsing through a glass shower door one night when I was in the bathroom. And then, of course, I was rushed to the hospital, and they threw scans at me and all sorts of stuff. And they couldn't really find anything that was wrong with me. They just said, you're pretty anxious, and, that seems to be what's going on with you. And I didn't get what they meant. I was just thinking, well, of course I'm anxious. I've just collapsed through a glass shower door. But I think what they were pointing to was the degree of anxiety that was in my mind over my life in general, which to them was just looking like anxiety, but to me was looking like me being a good lever configurer. I just thought that was me on my game, so like, you don't know what's wrong with me? Don't worry, I'll use the levers up here and I'll figure out what's wrong with me. And that didn't work out too well. So here I am, getting increasingly unwell, and then feeling the pressure of a baby on the way, and being, newly married, and feeling like I have to configure how I'm going to work supporting my family and all of these sorts of things. And then I'm in this increasingly debilitated state to which doctors are not able to give me many answers. So I really rev up this thing in my mind. I really go into, don't worry, I'll figure this out. And I watched as I literally went down, 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 further downhill. And it culminated in pretty much my whole life kind of falling apart. My wife and I were separated for a bit. I didn't see my son born because I was too sick. I was hospitalized for 3 months. And it was a really dark period. And I started to make some form of recovery with the treatments that I was given. And by the time I came out of hospital, it was sort of early 2008. I would say I was sort of semi-functional, but I was very far from this kind of type A high-performing guy that I'd always seen myself to be. And I was very upset about that, and really struggling in my mind to try and work out how to get back to that. And I remember I was with my friend who was a yoga therapist at the time, and we were just chatting over life. And there was this moment where I got incredibly quiet sitting with him. And I don't I can't tell you what we were talking about. And I know I didn't sit in that quiet for long, maybe 5, 10 seconds, if that. And I thought, this is nice. And then I quickly resumed the troubleshooting in my head. Yeah, this quiet space, that's lovely, isn't it? But what about my marriage? What about my health? What about my symptoms? What about my work and the fact that I'm being supported by family and all these things that my mind was objecting to? So it was like I touched this quiet, but I didn't respect it. I didn't see that there was a value to it. It was like, yeah, well, quiet's nice, but how do you navigate your life? And so I then spent the next 7 years on this journey of, like many people do, trying everything under the sun, trying to figure out everything, sort of knowing there was this quiet there, but not really seeing the value of being there in any way, shape or form, and really still holding on to this part of my mind that thought it could figure everything out. So 7 years this kind of went on. And during that 7 years, I got involved with the principles. I started to learn more about it. I'd formerly been mentored by Michael Neal, and I kind of re-engaged with him at the point he moved his practice over to doing more work with the principles. And I got very curious about what he was doing because it was so different to what he'd done before. And, you know, several things happened, and I ended up sort of working with him and apprenticing with him at the time. And during the time I was apprenticing with him, he'd asked me at the beginning, he said, is there anything that might sabotage your apprenticeship? And I said, yeah, I'm going to have some kind of health flare up that's going to mess everything up. And sure enough, that's what happened. I had this health flare up. And I remember one day going to see him. He was in London at the time. And I had this problem with heat intolerance and sunlight intolerance as part of my symptoms. And it literally resulted in me shadow walking. I had to walk in the shadows of buildings, because if I was in the sun, I'd get this incredible reaction, feel very, very unwell. And I'd had this experience going to have lunch with Michael one day. So I thought, you know what, Michael Neal, he's a coach, maybe he's got some insight into this stuff. So I asked him, I said, have you ever had anybody that had this problem? And he said, no, but maybe you're a vampire. And I said, thanks for that. And I didn't know what to say for it for. And he said, well, being more serious, maybe this is the power of thought to create your experience. To which I used an expletive. I know we're not really swearing on here, but I basically told him to off. Because to me, that was like, you're making this up, John. You're making up these symptoms. And I'd had enough people in my life who told me that this was all in my head and that it wasn't a real thing. So I was like, I wasn't very happy that day, but the seed had been sown. And I found myself going to see a functional medicine doctor who had been on my radar for a while. And he threw a battery of tests at me. And the tests all came back normal, bar a couple of them. And I remember him saying, yeah, your nutritional status is all green, which didn't surprise me because I had a spreadsheet of supplements that I needed to take and alarms set on my phone to make sure I was taking them. So I was like, yeah, I'm not surprised. I've configured the levers of my supplements really well. No wonder I've got green for all of that. But there was another one that came back and it showed that my cortisol was really high and my other hormones were on the floor. And I said, well, what's that? And he said, well, cortisol's high when you're in fight or flight. And I was like, well, why would I be in fight or flight? I'm not doing much. I'm not having a fight with anybody. I actually wasn't doing very much with my life other than trying to get better. And then I remembered what Michael had said to me. He said, maybe this is the power of thought to create your experience. And I realized that for the longest time in my life, I had lived in the control panel of my head every waking moment of my life, trying to get somewhere, trying to control and configure and work out my life. And I thought that all took place in thought. And what I came alive to in talking with this functional medicine practitioner and putting it together with my understanding of the principles was that, oh no, this is just an innocent misunderstanding that I've had, that thought somehow runs the show. Actually, there's a deeper intelligence, what we call in the principles mind. And this is the thing that is always operating inside of us all of the time. It's just that John really thinks he's really good in his thinking at running this stuff, but actually the results of these tests show that John really sucks at doing all of this, and this is why I'm sick. And to take your share, Joe, that was the moment a house of cards collapsed in my head. It was the moment I recognized that I had been taking on the weight of thought in my head, thinking it was valuable as a tool to run life, run my illness, and get somewhere. And what I saw was, no, that place I dropped into all those years ago with my yoga teacher, well, that was what I was looking for all along. And it had nothing to do with my life. It was inside of me all along. And the only thing that was ever taking me away from that was my innocent misunderstanding that somehow thought was the thing that navigated my life, when actually it did anything but. So that day, it fell apart. And I literally felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. Now, I'm not going to tell you, my journey was not quite like yours, Joe. I didn't suddenly get rid of all my symptoms. What I did get rid of was the idea that they were being caused by anything other than my overvigilance. And I did get rid of the idea that they were somehow something to be feared and controlled. So I started living my life just with the symptoms, not being afraid of them anymore. And because I wasn't afraid of them, and because I wasn't overvigilant about them anymore, the body then went into a state of rest and digest, probably for the first time in many years, and started to do its thing. And I found that, to take the heat intolerance thing, within 6 weeks of sort of having this insight, I was now on holiday in Turkey. There used to be this very unflattering photo of me on my old website of me standing with my shirt off in the sunlight in 40 degrees C heat in Turkey, and with a bit of a belly as well at the time. But it was such a big deal, because in 6 weeks I'd gone from shadow walking to being outside in the sunlight and the heat without any symptoms. It had literally collapsed. This whole symptomology and pathology collapsed as I'd reconnected to that space of quiet, and I'd respected it as the source of what runs us and what runs life. Now, I thought, to how I've ended up helping other people, I thought, well, you got better quick. You can't have had chronic fatigue. Nobody gets better from chronic fatigue that quick. They must have misdiagnosed you. It's really nice that you're well. Let's park the fact that you've got better. Don't do any work with it ever again. And let's get on with doing all the other stuff that you like doing. I did not want to work with chronic fatigue syndrome. I resisted it big time. But hey, life had a different plan. And the house that I'm living in, we ended up buying it. And the guy who owned it, he told me that his granddaughter was really unwell with chronic fatigue. And she was down to like a 20% attendance rate at school. And I heard the story and my heart broke. And I was like, look, John, just get over yourself. Have a conversation with her. At worst, you're going to have a cup of tea and be nice to her. At best, maybe she'll feel a bit better. That was how I saw it. Well, I met with this girl and I saw the same misunderstandings about performance, about trying to get somewhere, about where peace was, about the value or the lack of value of thought in navigating our lives. And I just shared my experience. I shared my knowing with her. And I watched as she recovered, and she went from being this withdrawn 15-year-old kid who looked just beaten by life to turning up in heels with makeup, telling me about parties she was going to and about the job that she'd taken on. I was like, guess you're doing better then. But I tell you, Joe, that was not enough for my mind. I was like, okay, great, she's better, back to what you did before. And then something else happened. So I ended up doing, another coaching training, and I had to do a community project. And I worked with somebody who had been ill for 23 years, tried everything under the sun. And I saw the same misunderstandings with her. And I did the same. I shared what I saw about the principles, about my own insights, about what I knew. And after a month of working with her, she comes to me and she said, I don't think I've got chronic fatigue anymore. I think I'm better. I think I'm well. And I was stunned. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. But I was holding on to my, I'm not doing this thing. So I had this idea. It was 2016. I was at the 3P conference and I ended up attending a a talk on research that was being given by Tom Kelly and some other 3P colleagues. And I went there and I had this harebrained idea. And I was like, you know what, John, there's one way to put this to bed. You can go and do some research and prove that it doesn't work, really. That was how I saw it. So I come out of this research and I meet my friend Karen, who is my colleague. And I said, Karen, want to do some research? She said, yeah, sure, what we're doing. And I told her what it was all about. So we got 23 people together and we worked with Tom Kelly to put together a formal research project. We had people from all kinds of backgrounds, people who'd been ill for a short period of time, longer period of time, one guy who was in a wheelchair at the time we worked with them. And we did it as a proper study. So we had a control group and a test group. And we worked with these people, again, sharing what we saw and what we knew, with the benefit of Karen's understanding of the sort of medical side of things. And we just watched and saw these incredible changes. And I loved what I think Hannah and you said in a way, Joe. It was not so much that we were addressing the illness so much. It was that we were addressing what every human being is looking for, which is peace and well-being, and the role of thought and the role of mind in our lives. And people were getting sight of that more and settling down. And because we were able to help connect the dots from our own personal recoveries of chronic fatigue, help them understand the relationship with that to what was going on in their bodies, we just watched as people started to make these incredible recoveries. By some miracle, I'm not going to say this is because of my controlling in my head. By some miracle, this ended up published in the APA after 3 years.
American Psychological Association.
Yeah, it got published, but that's humorous to me, because I would love to say, yeah, Joe, that was because I was really good at making stuff happen, and it was my type A, in my head lever pulling that made that happen. No, I was dragged along by mind, and eventually had to accept the fact that, okay, there was something to this, and somebody else, when it was peer reviewed, thought there was too. And there is, because we see some miraculous stories. But I got into this not out of choice. I got into this because life knew better than me.